Lena had been working in the big house for only 3 months, but it already felt like she had been there for years. Every day was almost the same. She arrived early in the morning, changed into her simple uniform, tied her hair back, and started cleaning rooms that were never truly dirty. The family who owned the house was wealthy, important, and always busy. To them, the place was more like a showpiece than a home. To Lena, it was a workplace where she moved quietly, careful not to disturb anyone, careful not to be seen more than necessary. She was used to silence. She rarely spoke unless someone asked her something, and most of the time people barely noticed she was there. She wiped tables, polished glasses, folded napkins, and made sure everything looked perfect. That was her job, and she tried her best to do it well. Still, she often felt invisible, like a shadow passing through the hallways. Sometimes she wondered if anyone even remembered her name. The mansion was beautiful, with huge windows, crystal chandeliers, and floors so shiny she could see her reflection. But the most striking thing in the whole place was the grand piano in the main hall. It sat there like a treasure, black, glossy, and elegant. Every time Lena walked past it, she slowed down just a little, her eyes drawn to it. She never touched it, not even the wooden edge. She only looked. And every time she did, something inside her tightened, like an old memory knocking on a door she tried to keep closed. She had once played the piano. Not just played, loved it. When she was younger, music had been the brightest part of her life. She had taken lessons, practiced for hours, and dreamed of performing on a stage. Her mother used to sit beside her and smile proudly, telling her she had magic in her fingers. But life had changed. Her mother got sick, bills piled up, and dreams had to wait. Lena left school early and took any job she could find. Music slowly faded into the background, replaced by responsibilities, long days, and worries she never shared. Now, working as a maid, she rarely thought about those dreams. It hurt too much, but the piano in the hall kept reminding her. Sometimes, when no one was around, she would stand still for a moment and imagine herself sitting on the bench again, her hands gliding across the keys. The thought made her chest feel warm and sad at the same time. Then she would shake it off and return to work. Dreams didn't pay rent. Dreams didn't buy medicine. Work did. On this particular day, the mansion was buzzing with activity. The family was hosting a big celebration that evening. Important guests were coming, business partners, friends, and people Lena had only heard about in passing. The staff rushed around, preparing everything. Extra tables were set up, decorations were arranged, and trays of food were carried into the kitchen. Lena was assigned to help in the main hall, dusting surfaces and making sure the place looked flawless. She moved from one corner to another, checking for fingerprints, straightening chairs, and adjusting candles. As always, she worked silently, blending into the background. But inside, she felt a strange, nervous energy. Maybe it was because big events always made her anxious. Maybe it was because she knew she would have to stand among crowds who didn't see her as a person, just as staff. Or maybe it was because she couldn't stop glancing at the piano, which the event planner had polished especially for the night. Its surface gleamed under the chandelier, more radiant than ever. She paused for half a second, her gaze fixed on it. She could almost hear a note in her mind, soft, clear, like a memory that never fully went away. Then someone called her name, and she quickly turned, nodding and hurrying to help carry a stack of glasses. The moment passed, and she buried the feeling deep again. When the evening arrived, the mansion transformed. Music played through speakers. Guests filled the hall, and laughter echoed through the air. Lena stood near the wall, carrying a silver tray, offering drinks whenever someone gestured. She kept her eyes down, as she had been trained to do. Staff were supposed to be polite, efficient, and invisible. That was the rule. She didn't mind. It was easier that way. The less attention she drew, the safer she felt. People around her talked about business, money, vacations, and fancy plans. None of it had anything to do with her life, but she listened quietly as she worked. Every now and then, someone looked past her, not at her, as if she were just part of the furniture. She didn't feel angry, just small, like she belonged to a world no one cared to truly see. At one point, she passed the piano again. The lid was open, the bench perfectly aligned. It looked ready for someone to play it. She slowed down just a little, careful not to make it obvious. Her fingers twitched by her side, longing for something she had denied herself for years. She wondered what it would feel like to press just one key. Would she remember? Would her hands still know what to do? She didn't dare try. Even thinking about it felt risky, like stepping too close to a dream that wasn't hers anymore. She walked on, serving drinks, collecting empty glasses, and staying out of the way. The hours felt long, but she didn't complain. She needed this job. It helped her support her family, helped her stay afloat. Every paycheck mattered. She reminded herself of that every time loneliness crept in. While moving through the room, she overheard bits of conversations. Some guests spoke kindly. Others complained about small things. One group of young guests seemed especially loud and playful, laughing among themselves. They didn't notice Lena at all as she walked by, but she noticed them. Not for their words, but for their carefree confidence. They lived in a world she could barely imagine, a world without worry. She shifted her tray to her other hand, her arm growing tired. Her feet ached from standing all day, but she kept going. She always did. That was something she had learned early in life. Keep moving, no matter how heavy the day feels. Later in the evening, as the crowd settled, the host gave a small speech. Lena listened from the side, far enough to stay unnoticed. The host talked about success and celebration, about how grateful they were to everyone who came. The guests clapped, smiled, and raised their glasses. Lena watched quietly, letting the moment pass like all the others. After the speech, music started again, but this time it wasn't loud or lively. It was soft background music, the kind that filled silence without drawing attention. It only made her think more about real music, the kind played by human hands, the kind she used to create. She swallowed gently, pushing away the thought. She needed to stay focused on her work. Feelings could wait. They always waited. As she continued serving, one of the other staff members whispered to her that they would take over her section for a moment so she could grab a glass of water. Lena nodded gratefully and slipped into a quieter corner near the back of the hall. She took a small sip of water and leaned against the wall, just for a brief rest. From where she stood, she could see the piano again, perfectly centered under the lights. She watched it as if it were calling her silently. It was strange how an object could hold so many memories. The piano wasn't just a musical instrument to her. It was a reminder of who she used to be. Someone hopeful. Someone with talent. Someone who believed the world would open its doors, but doors had closed instead. Life had taken a different path. She told herself she had accepted that. Still, the sight of the piano stirred something deep. Inside her, something she didn't have words for. A soft sigh escaped her lips. She straightened her posture, set her empty cup aside, and returned to work. The night wasn't over yet. She had tasks to finish, people to serve, and no space for daydreams. Even so, as she walked back into the crowd, she couldn't shake the feeling that the piano was more than just decoration tonight. It felt like something was waiting, something she couldn't see yet, but could somehow sense. She didn't know that this simple, ordinary evening would take a turn she never expected. She didn't know that her quiet life, her hidden gift, and her unspoken dreams were all about to collide. For now, she was just the maid no one noticed, moving through the grand hall with quiet steps. But deep inside her, a part of her heart long silent was beginning to wake up again, one small memory at a time, as the piano sat in the center of the room, waiting for a story that had not yet begun. Lena sat in the patrol car, her wrists sore from the tight handcuffs. The interior smelled faintly of leather and disinfectant, a sterile smell that made her feel even more out of place. She kept her hands still, resting them on her lap, trying not to fidget. Every nerve in her body felt tense, and her mind raced with questions. Why was this happening? What had she done to deserve this? All she had done was walk home. It didn't make sense. The officer driving, Deputy Collins, didn't speak much. He glanced at her once in a while, but mostly stared straight ahead, focused on the road. Lena tried to make sense of the silence. She considered asking a question, but every time she opened her mouth, she hesitated. She wasn't sure how he would react. She had learned long ago that some people could be unpredictable when they felt in control. She decided it was safer to stay calm and quiet. Even though her heart pounded in her chest. After a few minutes, they arrived at the station. Lena stepped out of the car slowly, her legs stiff from sitting in the handcuffs. Her shoes made small noises on the concrete floor. The station was much bigger than she expected, filled with long fluorescent lights that buzzed quietly, giving everything a pale, cold glow. She could hear footsteps and muffled voices behind the walls. The air smelled faintly of coffee, paper, and cleaning chemicals. She felt small, like a single leaf in a giant building. Collins led her down a hallway lined with gray lockers and closed doors. He didn't say a word. Lena tried to catch glimpses of the signs on the doors, but they were all official-looking, with words like evidence, records, and interrogation. Each step she took made her stomach turn a little more. She tried to keep her breathing steady, in and out, counting quietly in her head. Finally, he opened a door and pushed her gently inside. The room was small, barely more than a closet, with a metal table in the center and 2 chairs on opposite sides. Lena was guided to sit in one of the chairs. The officer motioned toward the other chair, but didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against the wall, crossing his arms, watching her. "This is your temporary holding room," he said in a flat voice. "You'll stay here while we figure things out." Lena swallowed hard. Temporary. Figure things out. She had no idea what he meant. She looked around the room for a phone, a clock, anything that could help her understand how long she would be here. There was nothing. Just a table, 2 chairs, and a gray wall that felt like it was closing in on her. Her mind raced. Should she cry? Should she speak? Should she explain herself again? She knew she had done nothing wrong, but words sometimes felt useless in moments like this. She decided to stay silent and observe, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone would come in and see reason. After a few moments, a young officer walked in. He was quiet, polite, and didn't carry the same weight of authority as Collins. He looked at Lena, noticed the handcuffs, and gave her a small nod. "You okay?" He asked softly. I guess," Lena said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't understand why I'm here." "I'll see if you can make a phone call," he said. He glanced at Collins, who didn't respond but didn't object either. "Just wait here for a minute." Lena's heart leaped. A phone call. She could reach her dad. Maybe everything would start to make sense. She nodded, trying to hide her relief. She took a deep breath and tried to steady herself. The young officer returned with the phone a few minutes later. "You can call someone," he said, handing it to her. She gripped the phone tightly, dialing a number she knew by heart. She didn't even look at the screen. The line rang once, twice, 3 times, and then a deep voice answered. "Lena?" "Dad," she said, her voice shaking but quiet. "It's me." There was a pause. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" His tone was calm, but carried that deep edge of authority that always made her feel safe, no matter what. "I'm at the police station," she said. She tried to keep her voice steady, but the words tumbled out anyway. They stopped me. They said I was involved in something, but I didn't do anything. I'm just walking home." She could hear him taking a sharp breath on the other end. "Where are you exactly?" He asked. Lena gave him the address of the station. She watched the phone closely, waiting. She felt a strange mix of fear and hope. Fear, because she didn't know what would happen next. Hope, because she knew her dad would fix this. He always knew how to handle things. "Stay calm," he said finally. "Don't argue. Don't say more than you need to. I'm coming." Her heart raced. Coming. He didn't yell. He didn't panic. He just said he was coming. And somehow, just that simple sentence gave her a tiny spark of comfort in the middle of everything that felt wrong. The minutes dragged on. Lena could hear people walking in the hall outside, their footsteps echoing against the walls. Occasionally, voices floated in through the cracks around the door. She recognized no one. Everyone seemed busy, moving quickly, and she felt invisible. Collins came back into the holding room. His expression was sharper now, a mixture of suspicion and annoyance. "Why are you on the phone?" he asked, glancing at the young officer. "Just letting her call her father," the young officer said calmly. Collins shook his head and looked back at Lena. "You have to understand. You're being investigated." "I didn't do anything," Lena said quietly. He didn't respond. He just turned on his heel and left the room. Lena exhaled slowly, trying to calm herself. She tried to focus on her breathing, counting each inhale and exhale, reminding herself of what her dad had said. Stay calm, don't argue, think clearly. She thought about the community event she had just left. The laughter, the music, the smiles. It all felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else's life. She tried to imagine she was still there, helping clean up tables, but the sterile walls of the station made it hard. She felt small and alone, even though she knew people were outside, going about their work. Then she remembered the young officer's kindness, the simple act of letting her make a phone call. That small gesture reminded her that not everyone was against her. Some people still saw what was right and fair, even when others ignored it. She tried to keep thinking about that. She thought about her dad's calm voice, the way he always made things feel under control. She remembered the advice he had given her over the years. When people act unfairly, stay calm, show respect, and let the truth speak for itself. She clutched that thought like a lifeline. The minutes passed slowly. Lena could hear the occasional rustle of papers and the distant ringing of phones. She tried to imagine she was somewhere else, somewhere safe, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw the handcuffs on her wrists and the hard stare of Collins. She felt a mix of frustration, fear, and disbelief. How could someone treat her this way when she had done nothing wrong? She remembered her school friends, her teachers, and the volunteers from the community event. None of them would believe this could happen. They all knew her as responsible, polite, and kind. She couldn't imagine explaining this to anyone without them being shocked. And yet, here she was, sitting in a holding room, unsure of what would happen next. Finally, after what felt like hours, or was only minutes, the young officer returned. He gave her a reassuring nod and whispered, "He's on his way. Just a little longer." Lena nodded, gripping the edges of the chair tightly. She tried to focus on that promise. She imagined her dad walking through the station doors, calm but commanding. She imagined him looking at Collins and making everything right. That image kept her from panicking, kept her from losing herself in fear. She looked around the small room again. The walls were plain, the table metal and cold. Nothing in the room could harm her except the uncertainty. She tried to remind herself that she had done nothing wrong. She had nothing to hide. She had just been walking home. A few moments later, she heard footsteps approaching, heavier and more deliberate than the others. Her chest tightened. Could it be him? Could it finally be her dad? She straightened in her chair, trying to sit tall even though her wrists still ached from the cuffs. The door opened slowly, and Lena's heart skipped a beat. A tall figure stepped in. She couldn't see clearly yet, but she knew immediately who it was. The way he moved, the calm authority in his posture, it was unmistakable. Her dad had arrived. His eyes met hers, and for the first time since being detained, she felt a sense of relief so strong it almost brought tears to her eyes. He didn't rush. He didn't yell. He didn't argue with Collins yet. He simply stood there, observing, taking in everything. And in that quiet moment, Lena realized something important. Everything was about to change. The fear that had been tightening her chest began to loosen just a little. She wasn't alone anymore. Someone who understood, someone powerful and fair, was here. And she felt hope, a fragile but real hope, starting to grow. The moment her dad stepped into the holding room, Lena felt a wave of relief wash over her. He didn't rush. He didn't yell. He simply looked around, taking in everything, calm and precise, like he always did when assessing a situation. The handcuffs that had weighed so heavily on her wrists suddenly felt less suffocating. She straightened in her seat, trying to sit tall, trying to hold on to the small thread of hope that had just appeared. Her dad's eyes met hers, steady and calm, and she saw the silent question there. "Are you okay?" She nodded, trying to smile, even though her heart was still racing. He stepped closer and leaned down slightly, speaking in a low voice just for her. "Breathe. Stay calm. We'll get this sorted," he said. The words were simple, but they carried a weight of authority and reassurance that only he could give. Lena took a deep breath, trying to steady the trembling in her hands. She had never felt so small, yet knowing he was here made her feel protected in a way she hadn't experienced before. Deputy Collins, who had been standing near the door, stiff and defensive, finally spoke. "She's being detained for questioning. She may have information about a recent theft. We're just following procedure." Her dad didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at Collins, calm and unshaken. Lena noticed how everyone in the room seemed to pause, as if the air had shifted. His presence carried authority, not because he shouted, but because he was steady, composed, and clearly in command. "Procedure?" he asked finally, his voice calm but firm. "You detained a minor without probable cause. You didn't follow your own department's policy. There's no warrant, no evidence, no justification. Explain yourself." Collins' face tightened. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He wasn't used to being questioned like this. Not in front of someone who clearly understood the rules. Someone who had experience in the kind of authority that couldn't be ignored. Lena watched her dad closely, marveling at his calm control. She had seen him handle difficult situations before, but this was different. This was personal, and yet he didn't let anger control him. He was focused on facts, on procedure, on making sure the truth came out. The young officer who had allowed her to make a phone call stepped back, giving her dad space. He looked relieved, like he had been hoping someone like him would arrive. Lena could see the tension in the young officer's shoulders slowly ease. Her dad took a step closer to Collins and continued, "I need to see the reports. I need to see the paperwork for the arrest. I need to see the evidence that justifies detaining this young woman." Collins swallowed hard. He fumbled for words, muttering something about following orders and having to check. But his explanation sounded weak and unconvincing, even to him. Lena noticed that his confidence was fading. He had seemed certain when he stopped her, but now he looked small and unsure that her dad didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word was precise, every question deliberate. "Where is your supervisor?" he asked next. "I want to speak with them immediately. This minor has the right to be released until proper procedure is followed. Failure to do so will result in an internal investigation." Collins finally picked up the radio and called someone. Lena couldn't hear the conversation clearly, but she could see the tension on his face. He sounded rushed, defensive, and uncertain. Lena felt a flicker of hope. The scales were tipping. Her dad turned to her then and said softly, "I need you to stay calm. Sit here and don't argue with anyone. Understand?" She nodded quickly. She had been waiting for this moment, and she trusted him completely. She sat back in her chair, trying to focus on the sound of her own breathing, letting him take control of the situation. Minutes passed. The door opened, and a supervisor entered. He was older, wearing a neatly pressed uniform, and carried himself with the kind of authority that demanded respect. He looked at Lena, at her dad, and then at Collins. The tension in the room was palpable. Her dad spoke first, calmly outlining everything that had happened, explaining how Lena had been stopped without probable cause, how she had been handcuffed, and how proper protocol had not been followed. He presented the situation clearly, concisely, without emotion, letting the facts speak for themselves. The supervisor listened, nodding slightly. He glanced at Collins, who avoided eye contact. Lena could feel the room shifting again, like the balance of power was moving. For the first time since being detained, she felt that justice was not just a word, but something that could actually happen. Her dad asked to see all documentation related to the stop, the arrest, and any reports filed. He requested the video footage from nearby cameras, the radio logs, and any witness statements. Everything was to be reviewed immediately. Lena could see Collins fidgeting, clearly uncomfortable under the scrutiny. Her dad didn't stop there. He spoke to the young officer quietly, asking questions about what he had observed, what he had done to follow protocol, and if anyone had pressured him. The young officer answered honestly, and Lena noticed how relieved he looked knowing that someone fair and experienced was in charge now. While waiting for the documents, Lena's dad stayed near her. He didn't hover, but he didn't leave her side either. He asked her questions gently, keeping her calm, making sure she understood what was happening without frightening her further. He explained that the process might take some time, but that she was safe, and that he would not allow anyone to mistreat her. She felt tears threaten to fall, but she blinked them back. It was not tears of fear anymore, but tears of relief. She had been scared moments ago, feeling helpless and alone, and now she realized she had someone on her side who could protect her and ensure that fairness was upheld after what seemed like a long wait. The supervisor returned with the requested documents. Her dad reviewed them carefully, noting discrepancies and missing information. He highlighted the lack of probable cause, the absence of proper procedure, and the failure to document any credible reason for detaining a minor. Every detail pointed to an error, or worse, misconduct. He addressed Collins directly, keeping his tone calm but firm. "You have failed to follow your department's procedures. You have detained a minor without justification. This is unacceptable. Internal Affairs will be notified. You will remain on duty only under supervision until this matter is resolved." Collins opened his mouth to argue, but his voice faltered. He realized he had overstepped, and he was being held accountable. Lena could see the frustration and fear in his eyes, but she also saw the shift in power. Her dad didn't need to yell or threaten. The facts were clear, and the evidence spoke louder than any anger could. Her dad then turned to the supervisor. "She should be released immediately," he said. "She has been held without cause. Ensure she is treated with respect and dignity. No further detention is necessary until a proper investigation is conducted." Lena could hardly believe what she was hearing. Release, freedom. After what felt like an eternity, she was going to be let go. Her heart lifted, and for the first time in what felt like hours, she smiled genuinely. She had been scared, confused, and hurt, but now relief was washing over her. The young officer unlocked the handcuffs carefully, apologizing quietly as he did. Lena rubbed her wrists, feeling the soreness fade slowly. She thanked him softly, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. He nodded and gave her a reassuring look before stepping back. Her dad stayed with her as she stood, making sure she was steady on her feet. He spoke quietly, explaining that they would walk out together, and that she needed to remain calm until they were completely outside the station. Lena followed his instructions, trusting him completely. As they walked down the hallway, Lena noticed the tension in the room had shifted entirely. Collins was silent, his authority diminished. Other officers gave her dad respectful nods, clearly recognizing his experience and position. Lena felt a mixture of pride and relief. Her dad had handled everything perfectly, without anger or aggression, and had restored fairness in a situation that had started so unfairly. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the parking lot. The air felt fresher than before, and Lena inhaled deeply, savoring the sensation of freedom. She looked up at her dad and smiled. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. He smiled back, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did well. You stayed calm, and that helped more than you know. Remember, the strongest way to handle unfairness is with patience and truth, not anger." Lena nodded, feeling the truth of his words in her heart. The experience had been frightening and confusing, but she had learned something important: calmness, patience, and honesty could overcome even the most unfair situations. They walked to the car together, and Lena couldn't help but glance back at the station one last time. She knew the events of the day would stay with her forever, not as a story of fear, but as a story of justice, courage, and protection. She had been scared, but she had also been supported by someone she trusted completely. That made all the difference. As they drove away from the station, Lena felt the weight of the day lifting. She didn't know what the investigation would bring, or what consequences Collins would face, but she knew one thing for certain: she was safe now, and the truth had been defended. The fear that had gripped her earlier was replaced by a deep sense of security and hope. She glanced at her dad, seeing the calm dad. Once Lena was safely back in the car, the first feeling she noticed was relief, but it was quickly joined by curiosity and a sense of wonder at how quickly the situation had turned. Only moments ago, she had felt small, trapped, and scared. Now she felt calm, even empowered, because her dad had arrived and handled everything. But she also noticed that the story wasn't over. Something bigger was happening. The tension she had sensed at the station hadn't disappeared entirely. It had shifted, moving from fear for herself to anticipation for what would happen next. Her dad started the car and drove slowly through the quiet streets. He didn't speak immediately, letting Lena process the moment. Finally, he glanced at her with that calm, steady expression that always reassured her. "You did well today," he said. "You stayed calm when it mattered most. That's not easy to do, and it made a big difference." Lena nodded, feeling the truth of his words. "I was scared," she admitted softly. "I didn't know what to do, but seeing you there made me feel safe." He smiled slightly. "That's because someone has to look out for you. and I will. But remember this. What matters most is how we respond to unfairness. Not with anger, not with fear, but with patience and clarity. That's how change happens. She looked out the window, watching the sun sink lower behind the houses and trees. The neighborhood seemed peaceful again, almost like nothing had happened. But she knew that the memory of the station would stay with her. She remembered Colin's hard stare, the metal cuffs on her wrists, the sterile smell of the room, and the feeling of being powerless. And yet, she also remembered her dad's calm voice, his precise words, and the sense that he had restored balance in a moment that had felt completely out of control. Her dad didn't speak for a few minutes, letting the quiet stretch between them. Lena realized how thoughtful he was, always calculating, always preparing for the next steps. Even in moments like these, he never acted without reason. She trusted him completely. When he finally spoke, it was with quiet authority. The next step is to make sure the system acknowledges what happened. Collins didn't just stop you unfairly. He violated procedure. That can't go unnoticed, and it won't. Internal Affairs will investigate, and I will oversee that process. They need to know this behavior is unacceptable, and that proper protocol is not optional. Lena listened carefully. She didn't understand all the details, but she understood enough to know that her dad's approach was fair and deliberate. He wasn't seeking revenge. He wasn't trying to punish Collins out of anger. He wanted the truth to be clear, and he wanted the rules to be followed. That was the kind of justice she had always admired in him. As they drove to his office, Lena began to process what had happened. She thought about how quickly things could spiral out of control, how easily assumptions and prejudice could create fear and misunderstanding. And she thought about how a calm, informed, and principled person could correct those mistakes and prevent harm. It was a lesson she would never forget. When they arrived at his office, the environment was completely different from the station. The air smelled faintly of books and coffee, warm and welcoming rather than cold and sterile. She followed him to a small conference room, where he began making phone calls and sending messages. Lena watched as he calmly laid out the situation to his colleagues, explaining everything that had happened at the station. His words were precise, clear, and measured. She noticed the reaction of his colleagues' respect and focus, but also a sense of urgency. They knew the importance of what had happened. Colin's actions could have serious consequences, and they had to respond appropriately. Lena realized just how much power and responsibility her dad carried, and how carefully he wielded it. After a while, he turned to her. "I want you to stay here and wait," he said gently. "Everything is being handled, and I will not let anything go wrong. You're safe, and I need you to stay calm." Lena nodded. She felt safe, even though she was still nervous. She could see that her dad was taking control, and she trusted him completely. She sat down in one of the chairs, taking deep breaths to steady herself. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of computers and the occasional click of a keyboard. Time passed, though it felt both slow and fast at the same time. Lena thought about what had just happened and tried to imagine the internal affairs investigation that would follow. She knew that Collins would face consequences for his actions. She didn't feel joy in that thought. She wasn't happy that someone had been unfair, but she felt satisfaction knowing that fairness and procedure would be restored. Her dad returned. After what felt like an eternity, he sat across from her, his expression calm but serious. "The investigation is underway," he said. "They're reviewing everything. The report, the radio logs, the video footage. They are taking this seriously. Colin's actions are not acceptable, and they will be held accountable." Lena felt a sense of relief. She had been scared and confused, but now she felt like the world had realigned, like balance had been restored. Her dad had shown her that fairness could prevail. even in situations that seemed completely unfair. You know, he continued, what you experience today is something many people face. But not everyone has someone who can intervene. It's important to remember that calm, reasoned action is often stronger than anger or panic. That's how real change happens. Lena nodded. She thought about her own response, how she had stayed calm, how she had followed his advice, and how she had trusted him completely. She realized that she had learned an important lesson about patience, composure, and trust. The office phone rang, and her dad picked it up immediately. Lena listened quietly as he spoke, his tone calm but firm. He asked questions, clarified details, and ensured that every step was being taken properly. The person on the other end responded with information, and he made notes carefully. Lena could see how meticulous he was, how nothing escaped his attention. Every action was deliberate, every word purposeful. After the call, he turned to her. They're going to interview witnesses, review all footage, and ensure that the proper disciplinary actions are taken. This will take some time, but the system will correct itself. You should try to relax while this is happening. Lena nodded again, feeling comforted by his words. She could see how much work went into ensuring fairness and accountability. It wasn't about quick judgments or anger. It was about precision, thoroughness, and doing what was right. Hours passed. Lena sat quietly, reading a book her dad had brought for her, occasionally glancing up at him as he worked. She watched as he typed, made calls, and reviewed information. His focus never wavered. She realized that real authority wasn't about shouting or forcing people to obey. It was about knowledge, clarity, and integrity. Finally, her dad leaned back in his chair and let out a small sigh. "It's all in motion now," he said. "Collins will be held accountable. The department is reviewing everything, and proper action will be taken. You did your part by staying calm and composed, and that made this process smoother." People noticed. Lena felt a mix of pride and relief. She had been scared, yes, but she had also learned how to handle a difficult situation with grace. She had trusted her dad, stayed calm, and now justice was being served. As they prepared to leave the office, her dad turned to her. "Remember, Lena, what happened today is a reminder that fairness is not automatic. It takes effort, it takes patience, and it sometimes takes standing up for what is right. But if we stay calm and act with integrity, we can make a difference." Lena nodded, taking in every word. She felt a sense of strength growing inside her, a confidence she hadn't felt before. She realized that even in moments of fear and confusion, she could rely on her own composure and the guidance of those who cared for her. When they stepped outside, the sun had almost completely set, casting long shadows across the street. The evening air was cool and refreshing, a stark contrast to the sterile, tense environment of the station. Lena breathed deeply, savoring the freedom and the calm after the storm. Her dad walked beside her, keeping a protective hand near her shoulder, though not hovering. They moved with purpose, quiet and steady, and Lena felt the weight of fear lift even further. She looked around, noticing the small details, the way the trees swayed in the breeze, the gentle hum of distant traffic, the quiet glow of streetlights turning on. The world felt real and safe again, a stark contrast to the tension she had felt only hours ago. As they reached the car, Lena turned to her dad and asked softly, "Will things go back to normal?" He smiled gently. "Normal might feel different after today, but things will be better. People will understand the importance of following procedure, of treating everyone fairly. And you'll carry this lesson with you, how to stay calm, how to trust, and how to act with integrity, even when things seem unfair. That's what matters." She nodded, feeling a sense of calm determination. She had learned more than she could have imagined. She had faced fear, confusion, and injustice. and she had emerged stronger, guided by patience, clarity, and the unwavering support of her father Dot as they drove home. Lena knew that today would stay with her forever, not as a story of fear, but as a story of strength, justice, and the power of calm, deliberate action. She had seen firsthand how fairness could prevail when guided by knowledge, integrity, and compassion, and she knew that she would carry it. The investigation began almost immediately. Lena's father, calm and methodical, knew that every detail mattered. He had spent years handling situations where even the smallest oversight could create unfair outcomes. Today, he approached it the same way, careful, thorough, and fair. Lena watched as he reviewed documents, checked reports, and organized statements. She noticed how his eyes missed nothing, how his questions were precise and purposeful. Every action was deliberate, designed to uncover the truth and ensure justice was served. He called witnesses first. The young officer who had allowed Lena to make her phone call, and a few civilians who had been nearby. Each person gave their account calmly, without fear or hesitation, because they knew her father was fair. He listened intently, making notes, asking clarifying questions when needed, but never raising his voice. Lena observed the process quietly, learning more about how fairness could be enforced not through anger, but through attention, respect, and clear evidence. Next came the review of the video footage. Cameras from the nearby streets and the station itself were examined carefully. Lena watched the playback with a strange mixture of curiosity and anxiety. There she was, walking calmly, carrying her backpack, humming softly. Nothing about her behavior suggested wrongdoing. Then the footage shifted to the moment the officer approached her, his expression stern, his movements aggressive. She winced slightly at how tense he looked, unaware that every action was now being documented and scrutinized. Her father pointed out the inconsistencies, calmly to the supervisor and internal affairs representative present. Notice how the officer does not ask for any confirmation about her presence at the event. Notice the absence of dialogue that could have clarified the situation. And note the handcuffs, unnecessary in this context. Each of these details matters, he said clearly. Lena could see the weight of his words. The officers present were silent, taking in the facts, realizing the gravity of what had happened. Lena herself felt a mix of relief and astonishment. Relief that the truth was being recognized, and astonishment at how calmly her father could dismantle an unfair situation without resorting to anger or threats. She realized that this was the difference between reacting and acting with purpose. After reviewing the footage, her father turned to Colin's supervisors. This is not a simple mistake. The detainment of a minor without probable cause is a serious violation. Disciplinary action must follow, and policy review is necessary to prevent this from happening again. We cannot allow fear or assumptions to dictate enforcement. This must be corrected, and it must be documented. Collins shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He realized that the scrutiny wasn't just casual observation. It was an analysis of his actions that would impact his career. Lena noticed that for the first time, the officer looked nervous. His confidence had been replaced by the weight of accountability. Next, her father arranged interviews with other officers in the department who had been on duty that day. He asked questions calmly, methodically, and with respect. Each officer was encouraged to speak honestly, knowing that the goal was not to punish unfairly, but to ensure that procedure was understood and followed. Lena was impressed by how much work was being done, just to make sure fairness was upheld. Throughout the day, her father kept her updated in small ways. "They're reviewing all logs and footage," he said at one point. "They are interviewing witnesses. This is how accountability works. It takes attention to detail, persistence, and patience. We are making sure everything is correct." Lena nodded quietly. She had learned that patience was powerful, In moments of fear, staying calm, speaking clearly, and trusting the process could shift the balance of power in meaningful ways. Today, she was seeing that lesson unfold in real life. Hours later, the department called a meeting to review findings. Lena's father presented the facts clearly, showing the evidence of misconduct and the proper steps that had been ignored. He highlighted how Lena had been cooperative, calm, and respectful, and how that had made a difference in how the investigation could proceed. The room was tense. Collins tried to defend himself, but her father countered each point with evidence and precise observations. The supervisors realized that there was no justification for the arrest, that the handcuffing of a minor was not only unnecessary, but a serious violation. Lena could feel the shift in the room. The truth had taken control. After the meeting, her father explained to Lena what would happen next. Collins will face suspension while the internal affairs investigation continues, he said. Depending on the outcome, there may be additional training, reassignment, or further disciplinary action. The goal isn't revenge, it's correction. It's about making sure fairness and procedure are respected. Lena felt a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about seeing someone punished. It was about making sure the system worked as it should. She had learned an important lesson. Justice was not about anger or retaliation. It was about correcting wrongs and preventing them in the future. Over the next few days, Lena and her father stayed involved in the process, checking in with internal affairs, reviewing updates, and making sure the investigation was thorough. Lena watched as her father communicated with calm authority, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. Every piece of evidence was documented, every report carefully analyzed. Lena realized that fairness required effort, vigilance, and persistence. The investigation revealed that Collins had a history of similar complaints, though this was the first involving a minor. Lena's father ensured that these patterns were considered in the disciplinary review. He emphasized that while mistakes can happen, repeated disregard for procedure cannot be ignored. This reinforced Lena's understanding of accountability. It was not about blame alone, but about ensuring that standards were followed. Her father also met with Lena privately to explain what had been happening behind the scenes. He told her, "This is bigger than just one officer. It's about the culture of fairness and responsibility. We are setting a standard, showing that even when mistakes happen, they can be corrected through calm, deliberate action." Lena nodded. She understood now that her experience had an impact beyond just her own situation. It was about fairness for everyone. Her actions remaining calm, following instructions, and trusting the process had contributed to the clarity of the investigation. As the days passed, Collins was suspended, and a formal review was conducted. New policies were discussed to ensure that minors could not be detained without clear evidence and proper procedure. Officers received additional training on bias, communication, and protocol. Lena's father stayed involved, consulting with internal affairs to make sure all recommendations were implemented. Lena watched this unfold and felt a mixture of pride and hope. She had been scared, confused, and powerless at first, but she had seen how calm, informed, and principled action could lead to real change. She realized that justice wasn't always immediate or dramatic. It was often patient, deliberate, and persistent. One afternoon, after a long meeting, her father turned to her and said, "You should be proud. You stayed calm under pressure, and that allowed us to handle this correctly. Your composure made a difference." Lena felt warmth spread through her chest. She had feared the situation, felt trapped and powerless. But now she understood that her own behavior, staying calm, trusting her dad, and following his guidance, was part of what ensured fairness. She felt strong in a way she hadn't before. In the end, the department issued a formal report confirming the violation of procedure and outlining corrective measures. Collins faced appropriate disciplinary action, and new training programs were implemented to prevent similar situations in the future. Lena's experience became an example of how fairness and procedure could prevail when handled thoughtfully and deliberately. Her father reminded her that day, "Justice is not about revenge. It's about correcting wrongs, protecting rights, and ensuring the rules are followed. You learned something important today. Patience, clarity, and calmness are powerful tools. Never forget that." Lena nodded, feeling the truth of his words in her heart. The fear and confusion of that first moment had transformed into understanding, strength, and hope. She realized that fairness could be restored, even in situations that seemed completely unfair, and that calm, deliberate action could change outcomes more effectively than anger or fear ever could dot as the sun set outside their home that evening. Lena sat quietly, reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about how quickly life could change, how assumptions and misunderstandings could create fear, and how one person's calm, knowledgeable action could restore balance. She thought about her father's words, the steps taken, the investigation, and the final resolution. She understood now that fairness required effort, attention, and patience, and that those qualities could create real impact. Lena felt a sense of empowerment. She had faced fear, injustice, and confusion, yet she had emerged stronger, guided by calm reasoning and trust in those who acted with integrity. The experience had taught her more than she could have imagined. She had learned about accountability, patience, and the power of truth in the quiet of the evening. Lena realized that while she could not control the actions of others, she could control her own responses. She could remain calm, act with intensity. The days after the investigation were quieter, but not without purpose. Lena and her father spent much of their time reviewing reports, attending meetings with internal affairs, and ensuring that every recommendation was implemented. While Lena had been at first consumed by fear, now she found herself focused on understanding the system, seeing how rules, procedures, and accountability work together to protect fairness. She noticed the difference that patience, clarity, and knowledge could make. It was a lesson she would never forget. Collins, the officer who had detained her, had been placed on suspension, and the department was conducting a formal review of his actions. Lena watched from a distance, not with anger, but with the satisfaction that fairness would prevail. The process was thorough, careful, and precise. Her father explained to her how these processes were not about revenge, but about correction, making sure the right steps were taken to prevent future mistakes. One afternoon, Lena's father called her into his office. "Today, we will finalize some of the procedures," he said calmly. "This is important because it's not just about what happened to you. It's about ensuring that the system functions properly for everyone. You'll see how careful, deliberate action can influence outcomes." Lena followed him into a small conference room where internal affairs officers were already seated. The atmosphere was calm, professional, and focused. She noticed how her father's presence seemed to set the tone orderly, deliberate, and fair. The discussion began with a review of the steps that had been taken, witness interviews, review of the video footage, and collection of reports. Each detail was scrutinized, analyzed, and discussed. Lena listened carefully, absorbing every word. Her father spoke clearly and precisely, pointing out where procedures had been ignored, what improvements were needed, and how policies could be updated. "Detaining a minor without probable cause is not acceptable under any circumstances," he said. "This is a serious violation. Proper training and reinforcement of protocols are necessary to prevent recurrence. Our goal is fairness, clarity, and accountability." The officers nodded, taking notes and asking questions where necessary. Lena could see how her father's approach commanded respect. He didn't raise his voice, and he didn't belittle anyone. Yet his authority and clarity made it clear that these matters were serious and required attention. After the meeting, Lena's father turned to her. "You'll see, the changes we're making today will prevent incidents like yours from happening in the future. That's the real power of standing up for what's right and doing it calmly." Lena nodded, thinking back to the fear she had felt in the holding room. She realized that while the immediate danger had passed, the lessons from that day would stay with her forever. She had learned how calm, thoughtful action could influence outcomes in a way that panic and anger never could. The following days were filled with follow-ups. Internal Affairs contacted Collins to clarify details and confirm procedures. Lena's father reviewed each communication, ensuring that the officer was held accountable and that any decisions were backed by evidence. Lena observed the careful balance of firmness and fairness. She could see how someone could be corrected without being humiliated, and how justice could be served without anger. At home, Lena reflected on everything she had experienced. She remembered the first moments in the holding room, the fear and uncertainty, the tightness in her chest, and the confusion in her mind. Now she compared it to the present, where calm and fairness had restored order. She understood the value of staying composed, following instructions, and trusting those who acted with integrity. Her father sat beside her, reviewing the final reports on a tablet. "Lena, you need to understand something important," he said gently. "What happened to you could have been handled unfairly at every step. But because we stayed calm, focused, and thorough, we restored fairness. That's how real justice works." She nodded quietly. "I understand," she said. "It feels different now. I don't feel scared anymore. I feel strong in a way." "That's because you are," he said softly. "Fear is natural, but how we respond to it defines us. You stayed calm. You trusted the process. You followed the truth. That makes a difference. That's what you'll carry with you." Soon after, the department issued its final report. It confirmed that Collins had violated procedure, had no justification for detaining a minor, and had failed to follow proper protocol. Disciplinary action was taken, including mandatory retraining and temporary reassignment under supervision. The report emphasized the importance of fairness, respect, and adherence to rules, highlighting Lena's cooperation and composure as a model for how civilians should be treated. When Lena read the report with her father, she felt a mixture of relief and pride. She wasn't happy that someone had been disciplined, but she understood that it was necessary to ensure that fairness and accountability were respected. The system had worked, not through revenge or anger, but through careful observation, evidence, and procedure. Her father turned to her and smiled. "Do you see? Justice isn't about revenge. It's about correcting mistakes, preventing harm, and protecting fairness. Today, you experienced firsthand how calm, deliberate action can make a difference." Lena nodded. She thought back to the holding room, to the fear, the confusion, the uncertainty. And she thought of her father, calm, precise, and authoritative, restoring order without losing control. The memory made her feel empowered. She realized that she could face challenges with patience and integrity, just as she had witnessed Dot as the days went on. Lena returned to her normal routine, but she carried the lessons of that experience with her. She approached situations with more awareness, more patience, and more confidence. She remembered how staying calm, trusting the process, and acting with integrity had changed everything. Her father continued to guide her subtly, reinforcing the principles of fairness, patience, and clarity in everyday situations. He encouraged her to ask questions, to speak up when something felt wrong, and to observe carefully before acting. Lena embraced these lessons, feeling stronger and more capable than she had before. One evening, after a long day of school and activities, Lena sat with her father in the living room. They spoke quietly about the events of the past weeks. "Do you think things will really change?" she asked softly. Her father smiled. Change takes time, but every action counts. The department will implement new policies. Officers will receive training, and awareness will grow. Fairness is strengthened every time someone acts calmly, honestly, and with integrity. You helped set that in motion today. Lena felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She understood now that the experience had been more than just a frightening event. It had been a lesson, a test of patience, composure, and trust. And she had passed it, not through force or anger, but through calm and integrity. Weeks later, the final steps of the investigation concluded. The department issued a statement reinforcing proper procedure, emphasizing the importance of fairness, and highlighting the corrections made. Lena's father assured that every recommendation was implemented and that no step was overlooked. Lena read this statement carefully and felt a sense of closure. The fear, confusion, and uncertainty of the past weeks had been replaced by understanding, empowerment, and hope. One weekend, Lena and her father went for a walk in the park. The sun was warm, the air fresh, and the world felt calm. She looked around at the people enjoying the day, the children playing, and the families laughing. She felt a connection to the world that she hadn't felt during her time at the station, a sense of safety, clarity, and trust in fairness. Her father walked beside her, hands in his pockets, calm and steady. "Do you remember how you felt when you first were detained?" he asked. "Yes," Lena said quietly. "Scared, confused, alone. And now?" he asked. "Now, I feel strong. I understand. I know that fairness can be restored if we act calmly and with integrity," she said. Her father smiled, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "That's right. You've learned something important. Fear is natural, but how we respond defines the outcome. Calm, clear, and principled action changes things. You lived that lesson." Lena nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She understood while she could not control the actions of others, she could control her response. She could remain calm, act with integrity, and trust in fairness. That understanding gave her confidence and peace. As they continued walking, Lena thought about the journey she had been through, the fear, the holding room, the handcuffs, the uncertainty, and how it had transformed into understanding, strength, and empowerment. She realized that her experience was not just about her own situation, but about the principles of fairness, patience, and accountability that could be applied to life in general. Her father stopped for a moment and looked at her. "Remember this, Lena. The world will not always be fair, but fairness can be enforced. It takes patience, observation, and calm, deliberate action. You have seen it firsthand, and you will carry that knowledge with you forever." Lena smiled, feeling the truth in his words. She had faced fear, confusion, and injustice, and emerged stronger, guided by clarity, calmness, and integrity. She understood that justice was not always immediate, dramatic, or easy, but that careful, thoughtful action could restore balance and fairness. As they walked home, Lena felt a deep,